Hello and welcome to the DeakHeads podcast. My name is Rob Delves, and as always, I'm joined by Sean Jessamine and Damon Bednarski. Firstly, hello to you, Sean, the also known as the greatest thing to come out of Pakenham since asparagus. How you going, Shawnee?
No, mate. The asparagus comes from Kooyarrup, not from Pakenham.
Yeah.
But I'm
that's,
good. I'm good, Rob. How are you?
That's not in the distant vicinity, is it?
Oh, it's a good 15 minutes away.
Yeah. Oh, how you going, mate? You good?
Yeah, mate. I'm good.
And heard a few things during the week that you may be back in training with Frankston. Is that true?
Yes, back at the Dolphins for a few weeks before Christmas.
Yep.
So, been good to see everyone and get back down there and have a bit more normalcy to our everyday routine. So, it's been good.
Absolutely. That's good. Good stuff. What's the agenda? Just a couple of weeks of training, then Christmas break, and then go from there?
Yep. Yeah. So we'll train up until about the 18th of December, I think, and then have a few weeks off, and then get back into it.
Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. And now we'll cross to the Moe Marvel, who is now back in Victoria. Damo, you're back. Welcome.
I am back, Rob. Thanks for having me again.
Mate, outstanding. So how was your time back in Sydney, mate? But more importantly, you're glad to be back in the Premier State?
Yeah, back in the COVID capital. It's
mate, not anymore.
Not anymore, but the previous COVID capital. Yeah, no, it was good. Good time up there. 8 weeks went pretty quickly, actually. So, fantastic time up there in Sydney with the girls. Unfortunately, we didn't get the bickies, but great time up there and good experience. But good to be back on deck in Victoria.
Absolutely. But so, have we done a podcast with you actually in Victoria?
Yeah, I think the first one. Yeah, first one.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Oh, good to see you back in the Big V. But Shawnee, do you want to give us an update on the merch? Because I think I put up a couple of things yesterday on some of the socials or a few days ago about our merch delivery. So do we want to give a little an update there?
Yeah, the merch has arrived. Christmas has come early for everyone. Rob, you came and picked yours up. You trekked down to Pakenham and came and got yours, and I met Damo as well, and he's got his. So we'll be handing them out like Father Christmas very shortly, and it will be good to see everyone repping the TRIAX merch. Come up well.
Yeah, it looks good too. Like initial feedback looks pretty good, and I think the green works really well. So hopefully we can deliver and distribute that at the back of the TRIAX sleigh over the new year, which would be pretty good, I reckon.
Absolutely.
But Sean's pretty happy with that. That's his baby, so he's good with that.
He has been under the pump with this, hasn't he? There's been a bit of pressure on Shawnee.
There's been pressure. This is got to get the merch done. This is my nickname. This is where the nicknames come from. I need to deliver. And sure enough, the goods have come up pretty well, Sean. So you should give yourself a pat on the back, mate.
Yeah, I will. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for that.
Yeah, right. Mate, if you're gonna make a blooper reel about me in a podcast, mate, you better expect to have a bit of heat in the next podcast to come.
Well, mate, if you're gonna give us material, then we're gonna use it, mate. What am I gonna do?
Yeah, fair enough.
I would like that Sean is quite sprightly, considering it is before 9 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, and he would not normally be up for another 2 hours here. So on for rocking up.
We're pushing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sean, if you can just stay with us, we should have a Sean cam for the whole episode just to see if he's awake.
Yeah, I might not off at one stage.
Might be a bit of caffeine, I reckon. Caffeine supplementation to get him through the next half an hour or so. Anyway, we just get back on track here a bit. Firstly, thank you, everyone, our followers throughout the TRIAX journey so far. So thank you for the feedback, support, comments on all the various platforms, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and then the podcast and screencast forums as well across YouTube, Spotify, and Apple iTunes. Really appreciate that. If you have any queries or comments or need to get in touch with us, then please do so. Happy to help out in any way we can, particularly with pre-season almost upon us. So definitely give us a yell out if you need any assistance with that. But it probably leads into our pre-season comment, probably leads into this portion of the podcast. So if we want to quickly recap the last podcast, we spoke about aerobic training methods and some of the background and rationale behind some of the program we do, particularly for team sport athletes. So maybe if we just want to briefly touch on some of the stuff we covered in the last podcast that people may need to catch up with before they delve into this one, boys.
Yeah. So last week, one of the major things that we're talking about is maximal aerobic speed. So this is a value that we can use to program training. Won't go into too much detail on that. If you want to know a bit more about that, listen to the last episode. But yeah, essentially we're talking about that and then how we can use that to prescribe training for different types of interval training, essentially. So there's long interval, short interval. We did touch on Eurofit, which is sort of a hybrid of the short interval, and then the Tabata training, which Rob really loves, which is another short interval version of training that we talked about. So again, if you do want to learn a bit more about that, you can either check out our blog or listen to last week's podcast episode, and there's a lot more information on those topics.
So was that our blog or your blog?
Oh, our blog.
Yeah. Yeah, not bad, Damon. Anything else on that, Sean? I think that was a pretty good summary there from Damon.
Yeah, we sort of just touched on I guess as well, the importance of your aerobic capacity and why it's important for sport and sort of the role it plays in being able to run out a match and that sort of thing. Yeah,
I think, and probably highlight, we've got, when we talk about this like aerobic capacity stuff, we do have a focus on team sport athletes in particular. So we're not really necessarily talking about if you're a middle distance athlete in terms of track and field, or if you're like an endurance runner, you probably want to do or look at things slightly differently than what we present today. But purely just sort of looking at the team sport approach in these podcasts. But yeah, so if you do this podcast, so the intro into this podcast, we'll look at more of a hands-on sort of practical application of what we talked about in the previous podcast. So the previous podcast is more about the background information. This one, we want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, which brings us into yours truly as a guinea pig a few weeks ago. So we'll set a bit of a scene here that myself, I went out to the local athletics track and did a dummy 2-kilometer time trial a couple of weeks ago, purely for the purposes of this podcast to help people understand what goes into programming aerobic capacity-based programs. So you can thank me later for just putting your heart on the line and getting the big Farlap ticker out and running around the track. So that will be the basis for this podcast, is training me, essentially, I believe, boys.
I think this is all just a bit of me time for you at the moment here, Rob.
I'm just trying to
put myself on the line for the podcast. I think you just did want to put your numbers out there so everyone knows how good you are.
No, not this time trial in particular. I was absolutely battling around the track. It was like a heavy 10 at Randwick, and I'm like, I'm not a mudlark. I was just trying to get through the ground. So, but we got there anyway. Ran a 2K time trial. So now what we're going to do is we're going to basically go through the process of now devising a program that would benefit me and help boost my aerobic capacity. So the two boys here are going to go through a bit of analysis, and then we'll go from there. So we'll take it the first step, which is essentially what we're going to do is identify the right training protocol for me based off our results from the 2K. So Damo and Sean have both had a look over my results in the 2K, so maybe if we can have a bit of a discussion around that, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so I think, what'd you get, Rob? 750 something?
Yeah, 756 or something, yeah.
Yeah, so pretty close to 8 minutes. I think, I guess the first sort of step once we get that result is sort of going to be asking Rob, like, what his goals are. What do you want to get out of this sort of thing? And we'd also sort of touch on what previous training you've done. Like if you've rocked up off, you've been lying on the couch all lockdown, raring to get back into it, we're going to need to sort of ease back into things pretty slowly. Whereas if you've sort of been training here and there a few days a week, but not with a real plan, then we can sort of kick things off a bit quicker. But yeah, I suppose as well, the test, like if there is anyone sort of interested in coming on as like a online athlete, this is sort of the process we'd go through. So we'd get you to do some sort of test. The easiest method is going to be a time trial, just because you can go out and run that in about anywhere from sort of, depending how quick you are, 6, 7 to sort of 8 minutes.
And when you say time trial, Sean, are we talking like 2K, 2 kilometers is probably your sweet spot if you're a team sport athlete, or what sort of distance would you say? Yeah, 2K?
Yeah, I'd say 2K gives you a long enough duration that you can sort of test your aerobic capacity. Anything, you can do shorter than that, but the results potentially won't be as accurate. You could do longer as well, but we find that you can get a good enough result from your 2K. So the difference between the validity of the result from a 2K to the 3K isn't going to be that much.
Yes.
I'd just add, anywhere from 1,500, because I know, having just worked with athletes from different countries, so I know the cricketers from New Zealand and South Africa use 1,500 meters as their marker. So, there's sort of out there anywhere from sort of 1,500 to 2Ks is that sweet spot, as you said, Rob. Yeah,
sweet. So I've done that, obviously ran that time. So Sean was talking about 7:56. So Damo is the king of MAS around here, if you look at his blogs. So what would that mean then, Damo, in terms of MAS? Like so I've run the test now. What information do I get from that?
Yeah, so the time that you get, so that's 7:56, we can then put that into an equation. So generally it's the time in seconds divided by the distance. There are a few little different algorithms out there that can alter it depending on athlete weight, but we won't get into those nitty-gritty details. But if you want just a general MAS score, that's what you would need to do. So 7 minutes 56 in seconds divided by 2,000 would give you the number, which I believe it's 4.2 or 4.3 or something.
Yeah, 4.2 something,
Yeah, something like that that Rob would end up with. So as we discussed, that will then mean 4.2 meters per second is the speed that Rob can run at, or the lowest speed he can run at to achieve maximal aerobic capacity. So then what we can do with that value is then start to use that to program your training. So that value is quite useful. And again, so we can use that for intervals. If you want to do fartlek running, essentially what it gives us is the ability to prescribe distances over a certain amount of time that is specific to Rob's current aerobic capacity. And then we can start to increase that to train Rob to run a little bit faster. So hopefully by the end of his training program, his MAS scores not 4.2, it might be 4.3 or 4.34 or something like that. So that's the objective.
So it's like so it's like a baseline measurement for your own improvement, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
That you can use to improve it. Yeah, right. So we've identified, I've run the time trial, I've got my time, we know my MAS. So now in terms of devising the right training protocol for my own personal training, this is, again, if you jump on as a TRIAX client, we sort of talk about, well, what are my goals and what I do, because that's going to obviously affect what you guys program, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if I tell you guys, look, I'm an intermediate athlete, play footy, mate, I play footy in the season, just the usual sort of season, but I'm not too active outside of that. And I want to have a decent sort of pre-season because I'm stuck in the forward pocket, but I'm an inside mid at heart. So I want to, build up the tank. So you guys receive all that information. And then, so we go into the programming side of it, don't we?
Yep. So I think, the first thing to address when it comes to a program is how many days a week.
I
think that if, as you said, Rob, in this scenario, you haven't done much. I think I'd start maybe just 2 sessions a week. That's just me. And then we can start to, once you've gotten through it, maybe 1 training block or 2 training blocks, we could make that 3 days a week, which is probably the ideal frequency, maybe 4, because I think 3 is probably going to mimic what your training is going to look like, both in pre-season and during the year. You're probably going to have 3 training sessions in the pre-season, and then during the season, you're probably going to have 2 training sessions plus game day.
Absolutely. Yep.
So 3 times is probably that ideal spot, but because you haven't done much to begin with, we're just going to start with 2.
Yep.
Yeah,
Easy.
I guess.
Okay, so we'll go from that.
Yeah, so if we've got our frequency, so then we look at how we would break that down. So depending on what your goals are, that's going to dictate how we actually program that. But generally, what we'd be looking at is, say, for example, if Rob wanted to improve his 5K running time. So this is an example you might have. So what we would potentially do is look at, in those 2 sessions, we would have potentially a long continuous run. So it may be that to start off with, we may not actually even run 5 kilometers, but we might start at, say, 4 kilometers just to get Ks in the legs, make sure that he can do that. And then the other session of the week, if we're just doing 2, would be an interval based session. So we're getting the work in the legs and getting used to that longer distance that he wants to run. And then the interval session that we've got there is to work at that higher intensity so that we can actually increase his aerobic capacity. So if you're just doing the 2 sessions, that's how we would structure it. And then if you're moving into 3, you could then mix and match that. So you might have a longer interval session, a shorter interval session, and then your continuous running session in there as well. And again, it's just working on, so if we're trying to improve aerobic capacity, you've got to work above your aerobic capacity, your current aerobic capacity, to develop that. So your long continuous run's probably going to be held at that speed that you can hold, unless we did some sort of pacing running where you run above. So to actually improve, we would be working on that in the intervals. So the short, obviously you're going to be trying to work on that higher speed sort of movement and just getting used to running at those high speeds. The longer interval would probably be closer to what your current aerobic capacity is, but just a little bit above, because you've got that rest time. So if we're structuring a session in the early days, because Rob's intermediate and he has been training a little bit, obviously we could start working probably at a little bit higher intensities than you normally would. So, we'd be in that sort of 100 to 120% of your maximal aerobic speed training for those intervals. And then for the continuous running, you'd want him to be running at as close to his maximal aerobic capacity over that distance as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you say, there's a couple of points there. So when you say 100 to 120% of MAS, like my own MAS, so 100% would just be the 4.21 I originally got. And then 20%, 120% is essentially 20% greater. So just chucking a bit extra on. That's what you mean, isn't it, by that?
Yeah, so your speed would increase. So rather than being 4.2, it might go up to, like 4.3.
Yeah,
so again, we're pushing you to be that little bit quicker in that training.
Yeah.
But obviously, when we're doing that, it's not that you're just doing that flat out. There's obviously going to be intervals. So we're going to adjust your work to rest ratio, which was talked about in the early episode, to account for that, to make sure that you can actually complete those sets at those intensity.
Yeah, right. And interesting. So if I was more of a beginner athlete, or not a beginner, but someone who didn't have as much sort of physical developed aerobic capacity, in terms of our training and stuff, would that be more volume based, do we reckon, at the start, instead of sort of mixing and matching? Or how would you sort of go about programming someone who potentially doesn't have that level just yet?
If that's the case, then the main thing is going to be trying to build your sort of aerobic base, which you will do through the longer interval stuff. Again, once you've probably done that for a little bit and you've got some familiarity with the running and the program, and you're able to get a little bit fitter, that's when you can start to sprinkle in maybe the stuff that's a little bit more intense. I think that's probably the best way to do it anyway, is to do a little bit of both, but it's not appropriate for every circumstance. So if you've just rolled up off the couch, you want to start just by trying to get through the session instead of doing stuff that's way above your 100%.
That was quite popular a while back when a lot of the fitness apps and stuff came out. It was like the couch to 5K and stuff like that. So a lot of how that works is it'll be a jog walk. So you'll jog for, it might be 60 seconds on, 60 seconds off, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, that sort of routine where you jog at a pace that you can hold for that amount of time. So you do 30 seconds and then you walk for the next 30 seconds. Again, that's a very similar thing. Is it's just, if you've come from absolutely nothing, what you'll find is after 2 weeks, if you're doing 2 sessions a week, you'll be able to probably go, if you started 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, you'd be able to do 60 seconds on, maybe 30 seconds off. It does, you do adapt quite quickly. But if you want a gentle introduction, is that, just tweak those work to rest ratios and how intense you're working. But that would be a way to do it, is just jog walk, then you can move into continuous. And then, as Sean said, just sprinkle in that interval sort of stuff. And within 6 weeks time, you'd go, wow, I can't believe that I, hadn't run in 5 years, and then you're up and running and you're, going at a half decent clip.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about, this is a little bit of a segue, but when we talk about sort of strength training, or actually maybe hypertrophy training when you're in the gym, people talk about time under tension is important. For aerobic capacity, time under tension for aerobic capacity, if you will, is also important. So how long roughly should we focus on running in terms of to actually boost our aerobic capacity? Because when we say you can do intervals, but if you only do one, that's probably not enough time to actually evoke enough of a response, is it?
No. You probably want to be looking at least 20 minutes.
Yeah. So that's just 20 minutes is that 20 minutes of running, or is that a 20 minutes total session?
Yeah, of actual running.
Yeah.
So that's a good point, Robin, and probably a key difference as well, because you might get you got your fitness watch on and it says you've done 25 minutes, but if 10 minutes of that has been your walking time, then and that's not quite getting to that 20 minutes of running.
Yeah, absolutely.
It does depend on the intensity, though. That's one thing. I think if you're doing quite a high intensity interval session, then there's a bit of leeway. But yeah, if you're working, as I've said, sort of at your maximal aerobic speed, if you're only doing 15 minutes, it's probably not giving you the outcome that you want.
Yeah, you can't. You're probably not going to be able to do 20 minutes worth of Tabata running. You'll find yourself pretty cooked. Pretty quickly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because I think with Tabata, I think usually they want about 3 to 4 minutes of set running. So that's what you want in each set. So you imagine doing 5 sets of that in one session. That would just absolutely cook you.
Pretty tough.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a few more skilled performers out there than what we can muster, I'm sure. So now we've determined roughly there what I should be looking at doing. So Sean suggests maybe early on that maybe 2 sort of quality sessions a week, and then quickly sort of build that into 3, which would sort of match in-season demands. I think that makes sense. That's pretty good. And then Damo talked about in terms of the training, so maybe look at some long interval stuff, and then try and accompany a interval session or a short interval session around that to boost the intensity as well. So trying to get a little bit of a boost in terms of working at above my maximal aerobic speed. So that's important as well. So the long interval stuff and doing interval and volume work will work around my current MAS. But then when we do the short interval stuff later on, that's trying to boost it by working above it in terms of the 120% MAS stuff. So we know that. And now, so the next part of me is actually doing the training. So maybe if we can have a bit of a discussion around actually incorporating the training and doing the training for me as an athlete, and how I can effectively continue and progress this program.
Yeah, so I think the first bit is, if you literally have just got off the couch, is not to just jump straight into the running. So you do have to do a bit of preparation there. So if you haven't been running that much or doing that, you got to make sure that you are preparing yourself. So whether that's a proper warm up, or if you need to foam roll before you go out there, or dynamic stretching, that's something that's very important. Now, a lot of people get down to the oval and they go, I just want to get this done. So just start running. If you're doing your long continuous stuff, I think it's not the worst thing if you just jump into it, because obviously you can control that speed. So maybe you might just start jogging and slowly build up. So, your first 500 meters might just be a warm up, and then you move into it. That's not the worst, because really you're working at lower intensities. Ideally, if you've got the time and the ability to, a warm up would be fantastic if you can do that. But if you can't, that would be my recommendation, is that you start off with some lower intensity stuff. If you have any issues, if you've got a dodgy calf, or your Achilles are tight or something like that, make sure that you do your prep before you get there and do that. Don't just jump out of the car. But with the continuous stuff, definitely you could get away with it, as long as you know what you need to do in terms of prep. If you're in intervals type of training, 100% you should be out there doing a warm up beforehand, because that stuff is a higher intensity. So you're not just out there having a jog around the park, this is above your maximal intensity. So a warm up would need to be conducted for that. So this just needs to be basic. So obviously it's running, so you're going to focus on your lower body. So dynamic movements through the lower body, some light jogging, dynamic stretches. So it might be leg swings, arabesques, different exercises like that. And then just a few high speed run throughs, and that would just prepare you for the physical demands of a higher intensity session.
I think we've got a pretty nifty blog on our website, don't we, about how to do a nice warm up.
Yeah, ramp it up, is it?
This is ridiculous. It's just, you talk about it's a me episode. Every podcast we do, I got a blog on this.
This is another Damo blog. So
yeah, I know. That's what I mean. Like it's Damo central. It's Damo's world, but we just live in it here at TRIAX.
I've only got 4 blogs, but I just plugged the crap out of them here, lads.
Yeah. So Sean, is there like anything else in terms of preparation stuff? I think the warm up one's important. I think what's the old saying is, if you don't have time to warm up, you don't have time to train, isn't it? Isn't it what they used to say? But
I can't say I've heard of that one, Rob, but I'll take your word for it.
Oh, mate. Well, I refer to you because you are the king of quotes, apparently. So I'm sure there's one up on your wall there.
You caught me off guard. Not used to anyone else dropping quotes.
It's not on his list in front of him, Rob. He hasn't got that.
Nah, it's not. Exactly right. It's too early in the morning anyway, I think, for quotes. No, but I think what Damon said's good about the warm-up stuff. I think if you can get yourself in a good routine in terms of your warm-up and your preparation, then like I just do it for any session. It's not going to harm you. Like we put a couple of I've put a couple of TikToks up during the week and Instagram reels about like preparations before I go for a running session. So if you want to check them out and give us a follow.
How's the pot calling the kettle black here? Hey?
Yeah, me. TikTok.
Don't hate the player, hate the game, boys. So you just got to jump in. But yeah, anyway, so let's get back on track here, Sean. So what other things can we do to manage ourselves whilst going through the training period?
One that's probably not considered enough is the surface that you run on, I think.
Interesting. Okay. Yep.
I think if you're coming straight off the couch and you're going to get back into running, going for a run on the footpath or the road probably isn't going to be too great for your joints, which is something we spoke about in, I think, our recovery podcast or maybe our return training podcast. Yeah.
Yep.
About how the joints take a little bit longer to recover and adjust than your muscles would. So I would recommend running on grass. So just down at your local footy oval or your soccer field or you can run on an athletics track as well, but they do have a little bit of bounce to them, but they're still,
And the grass does replicate the surface that you're going to be playing on for most team sports. Obviously,
that's also a good point.
Yeah, if you're a netballer or a basketball or something like that, then obviously if you can get access to your type of surface, then try to do that. But obviously for your longer stuff, even if you are a court-based athlete, doing it on grass or a softer surface is just going to look after you, your body a lot more. Yeah,
that's a great point, especially about that sport-specific training there, Damon. It's really good. So in terms of another sort of plug here, in terms of our recovery techniques. So what sort of things should we be doing in terms of after and before session? Actually, maybe I should just answer this because I also have a blog on this. But yeah, so in terms of recovery stuff, again, in one of our TikToks, I went down to the beach and did a bit of a walk in the seawater there, which was nice after a couple of sessions. That was just good, actually, like mentally, probably better than it was physically. But again, it was a nice sort of relaxation period after an exercise session. So things in terms of nutrition, hydration, jumping in the ice bath or going down to the beach and dipping your toes in the water there. So it's a lot of those sort of things. Again, if you get yourself in a good habit with that stuff, then it just sort of takes care of itself after a while. Like that becomes a part of your training session itself, I think, boys.
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily like a recovery technique, but something that can impact your recovery is
Sleep?
Like a cool down.
Oh,
like
yeah.
after your session. So
what do you mean by that?
So you wouldn't go and, as we just spoke about, you wouldn't jump out of the car, go bang straight into your session. And it's the same after your session. You don't finish a pretty strenuous set of intervals and then go bang straight into your car. You take 5 minutes just to have a little bit of a stretch. Whether the stretching has that much of an impact on your soreness, debatable. But it can be an opportunity to just allow the body to relax a little bit in a gradual manner. So instead of going where your heart's beating at, 180 beats a minute, and then you jump straight back in the car, just sit down, take a few minutes, take some deep breaths, do a couple stretches, and then sort of make your way back to the car and head home.
Yeah. Now that gradual cool down. So if it's a light jog, just bringing that heart rate down, letting your muscles remove any byproducts and stuff like that you may have incurred during the session, and getting your breathing rate back to normal. There's nothing worse than sitting in the car straight after you've done a session and you can just feel when you get out of the car at the other end and you're like, geez, I can't get out of the chair because you've stiffened up a bit. So like I said, if you take that 5 minutes just to look after yourself a little bit, and then when you get home, you're going to feel a lot better than you would have if you've sat in the car and your muscles are in contracted positions and all the byproducts have built up and you're going, geez, this was tough. I mean, that's all you need to do. If you can spend 5 minutes at both ends, so if you're going to run for 20 minutes, you do a 5 minute warm up, 5 minute cool down, there's half an hour there. It's pretty easy to fit that within your day. Get a session in.
Yeah, absolutely. Another important part is when we're doing the training session itself, or when we're doing the training, we might get a week or two in, or maybe 2 to 3 weeks in, and we feel like we're maybe improving, or it might be too much. So in terms of managing our training load and tailoring that, how do we go about that during the process?
I think it's important that as Damo sort of mentioned early on, you're going to see a little, like early stages, you will see improvement. Because if you're going from nothing and then you're starting to train, you're going to see improvement. So it's always going to be tempting to try and be like, yep, let's keep going even more and more and more, because you feel on $1 million and every session you're getting better. But it's important that if you haven't been doing much, and again, back to our second podcast episode about returning to training, that sometimes the effects of going too hard too early, they don't show up straight away. So it's important to sort of manage our enthusiasm a little bit, because not that we want to try and turn around and be like, no, we need to play it real safe, because we want to celebrate our wins and we want to celebrate our improvements, but we need to sort of manage it a little bit in a way that is sustainable, so that we're not going to have 6 great weeks and then all of a sudden we've got an injury and you're back to square one.
Yeah, I think it's all about subtle increases in the training load. So that's where, if we're giving a program out to a client, it's all going to be very like progressive, and it's not going to exceed that 10%. So, it might be a slight tweak of your intervals, go from, 30 seconds up to 45 seconds at the same pace, but you just get a little bit extra time. Or if you stay at the same one, then your pace goes up a little bit. So it's probably more about altering one variable rather than altering a couple at a time. And as you'll see, is that at the start it'll skyrocket your progress, but then you're going to hit a plateau, and that's where it's all about those little tweaks to get that maintain and then also improve slightly there. So as I've said, it'll be great at the start. It's about then pushing through and just maintaining that with some subtle increases in intensity.
And you can get creative with that progressive overload, can't you, Damo? So if you for instance, if you wanted to build volume, so you wanted to do more distance as part of your overload, then if you're doing intervals, you could do one more interval on one day and then do another on another day. You don't just have to do it all in one, do you? You can sort of spread it out over your training week, can't you?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, your total load and volume for the week is going to be there at the end of the week. So as you said, you can spread it out. So it might be, your continuous runs 500 meters longer, and then you do 2 extra reps on your interval training, and there you go. You've already got potentially, 700 extra meters.
So we just talked about in terms of monitoring our training load and the potential to increase it as we go along. What happens, boys, when we feel like we need to decrease the load? And maybe if we can provide some examples when it would be appropriate to decrease the training load during the program.
Yeah, so this is what we would call like a deload of training. So it is all good that we increase and we keep progressing through our training, but throughout training as well, you do need to drop the load down. So we can't be operating on an increasing level of training and just keep going up, 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 up. So if we did that for 12 weeks in a row, it just doesn't happen like that. So similar to like strength training, what you might do is with a deload is say you might do 4 weeks of quality increasing work. And then at the 5th week, you would look at what we do is with a deload is we will decrease the volume of training, but we will maintain the intensity at a relatively similar level. So essentially what we're doing is maintaining the quality of training that we're doing, but then giving the body an opportunity to rest and recover by reducing the total volume of training that we do. So that doesn't mean that we cut down the number of sessions that we do. It just might mean that we cut down the volume. So if we've been doing, for example, 3 sets of 8 for our interval training, we might just drop that down and do 2 sets of 12. Oh, not 2 sets of 12. That's actually the same, but like 3 lots of 6, something like that. Yeah. So you're just dropping it a little bit down the total volume that you're doing there. So, and again, if you wanted to, the intensity can drop slightly, but again, we don't want to drop it massively. So it would be looking in that 10% window. So we might drop the intensity down. So if you're working at 120% of your MAS, you might go down to 110 for that week and just give your body an opportunity to recover.
That's good. Sean, is it so in terms of like if you're a team sport athlete, like these deload sort of periods tend to happen probably at the end of pre-season. So when you go into the competition phase and around Christmas time as well. So if you're if you're training by yourself at the moment in terms of pre-season, should you look to incorporate that as a part of your program anyway?
I think it depends on. You can always plan to have a deload week, but I think sometimes just like circumstances in our life will come up and you end up having a deload week, like accidentally. Like you might not get one session in, or you might have to cut a session short. So if you have gotten to 4 weeks of really good training, that's when you might put a deload week in. But if you look back and you say, shit, I missed a session this week, I had to cut a session this week short, you could still potentially deload, but it might not be, you might not cut down as much. Otherwise you might just keep going ahead with what you had planned, because there's no point doing a deload if you haven't been doing that gradual increase every week.
I think that's a great point. And seeing as that we're sort of pitching this at amateur and sub-elite athletes, that's going to happen. Dinner with the family or too many beers at the Swan on a Saturday night is going to interrupt potentially that third session of the week. So that's very good advice there, Sean.
So, well, maybe just to summarise what we talked about there. We talked about me as the athlete, I've done some sort of testing. I've come to you boys with the goals and where I'm at in terms of my training status. And now we've then moved into me actually physically completing the training. And now we're looking at probably the final piece of the puzzle for this podcast is testing. So retesting again. So maybe if we just want to open the discussion in terms of why we should test again and then how we go about doing that in order to gauge our improvement. So Sean, do you want to kick us off for this one? Yep.
Yeah. So the benefit is going to be that we get a more accurate measure to then prescribe your training, because as we've said, you're going to improve. How much, we don't know. So that's why we need to test. So if you keep doing your testing 12 weeks in at your week 1 testing score, whether you use MAS or your maximal aerobic capacity to prescribe your training, you're going to be selling yourself a little bit short, and you're not going to be able to get the same improvements. And that's why you might see a plateau, because you've started to increase, and then you're still training at the same level. So it's just going to sort of flatline a little bit. So we need to retest, work out what our new normal is. And then we can prescribe our training from there. It's going to have to be the same test. So if you did a 2K time trial to begin with, you can't go and do a beat test or a yo-yo test. We want to try and keep it consistent, because while every test gives a decent gauge of your MAS or your VO2 max, they do differ a little bit. Any test like this, we're not going to get a 100% accurate result, but we're trying to get as close as possible. So we want to try and keep that similar, so we're consistent throughout.
Yeah, I think adding to that consistency and the validity of your test. So making sure that you do the same test, if possible, run it at the same place, on the same track. So if you did it on an athletics track, go and do it at the same one. If you did it at your footy oval, do it there again. Obviously, there are errors sometimes with marking out. If you're doing a 2K time trial, if you've got a trundle wheel or something like that, or you know that you've run it at the same spot every time at your local field, try to be as accurate as possible with that. And if you can, doing it at the same time and under the same preparation, ideally. Obviously, as we said before, like, things pop up in life. So you might have done it, at 5 p.m. on a Thursday one time, but this time you have to do it in the morning because that's when it suits. That's okay. But again, just try to keep all the other factors as consistent as possible when retesting.
Absolutely. And then, so how many times should we retest, and what sort of intervals should we be looking at retesting? So do we do this in our deload week? Like, is it a 4 to 6 week thing, or when should we look to test again, and how many times after then should we look to retest?
Yeah, it's really dependent on your schedule. So normally what would happen in, let's say, in your footy preseason here, Rob, normally you'd probably do your first test in week 1 of the preseason to see where you're at, and then you can program your training from there. You probably wouldn't retest again until after the Christmas break, just because that's generally how it operates. So, and then what you would do most likely is when you get back from the Christmas break is test again in week 1. Now, it's not the best set of circumstances because over the Christmas break, there's a lot of other factors that occur there that may impede your score, but that's how you would do it. And then generally your preseason is going to be like 12-ish weeks. So you'd want to probably retest again towards the back end of your preseason as well, just to see if the training that you've been doing has been effective and there's been improvements, and you want to know where you're at going into the season. One thing I would say is that you don't want to be testing just for testing's sake, and you want to have a purpose as to why you're doing that. So, again, so testing in the first week of preseason is going to give you a gauge of where everyone's at and what you need to do. Testing again after the Christmas break, again, is just going to give you the numbers and the information on where everyone in your squad is. Again, that next test, so 3 is probably a good number for the preseason as a number of tests, but you don't want to be doing that last test in the week before your first game, because that's not really going to give you much. It's going to say, okay, the preseason was good, but you want to be able to do something with that information if it's just there, because once you get to in season, it pretty much becomes maintenance and just holding on to what you've developed. So, say you do game start in middle of March, and we come back to training second week of January, you'd want to find a middle spot somewhere in between there to have that third test to make sure that that block of training after Christmas has been effective, and then to tailor your training for the second half of that to really ramp things up to make sure that you're firing for the season. So that would probably work out to be somewhere early February would be when you'd want to do that third test, just to see where things are at. Again, later on in the season, you might want to do a test sort of at the mid-season break or something like that, just to see where people are at and if you need to boost some training. But in season really more is about just holding on to what you've developed.
Very good, Damo. Not bad at all. It's pretty comprehensive, I reckon. So we might finish there. We might just maybe give a quick recap as to what we've gone through and sort of like the process surrounding the prescription for me based off my results. So firstly, what I did was ran a 2K time trial, gave my time to the boys, and then we determined our MAS score off that. And then we worked out in terms of like training prescription, in terms of what I was what I was going to do in terms of like a programming. So how many times a week I should be doing it, what time for training, and how long. And that's based off my goals and my current fitness level. And then we moved into sort of managing myself during the actual training period itself. So in terms of my recovery and rehab stuff, and then moving into loading, increasing the load, deloading as well. And then, of course, retesting at the end of it. So I think that provides a nice little summary there. I don't think I've missed anything there, have I, boys?
Nah, you've covered it all there, Rob.
Thanks very much, Damo. Thanks very much. Thanks, Sean. So I think we might leave it there, boys, if you haven't got anything else. But we will take the opportunity. So if you need any assistance in terms of devising your own sort of conditioning or athlete training programs, please get in touch with us. We've provided a nice little outline here, but it's obviously can become a bit more complex than what we've said. So please get in contact with us. We're happy to help out individual athletes as well as teams across the board there. So get in contact with us on that front. And you can do so via social media, which would be what, Sean?
If you search for TRIAX Performance on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or TikTok, you will find us.
Whoa, baby!
I'm not sure about TikTok.
The talk.
Can they even message us on TikTok, or can they just find us on TikTok?
No, I can. There's DMs there, absolutely.
Slide on the TikTok.
And then Damo, so the more formal or old school way.
Yeah, so
contact us?
Carrier pigeon or email. Email's admin@triaxperformance.com. And if you want to check out the website, that's triaxperformance.com.
Very good. Very good. So just to wrap up, a thank you to everybody who's tuned into our podcasts and screencasts on YouTube, Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Really appreciate that and the feedback we get. So if you have any questions, queries, comments, or any other inquiries, and please do not hesitate to get in contact with us. We're happy to help out in any way, shape, or form. So I think that'll do us.
Yeah, if you get your merch as well, we want to see it. So send us a photo or chuck it up on Instagram with your story or something, and tag us. Let us know that you've got it and you're repping the TRIAX brand far and wide.
The TRIAX triangle. Look out. Very good. And that should be distributed in the near future as well. So keep a lookout for your chimney and leave some beer and maybe a couple of carrots out for the TRIAX reindeer in the coming days. But I think on that note, we'll probably wrap it up. So thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.